Talking Horticulture. This week we're going to be discussing biodiversity, and very fitting as it is National Biodiversity Week this week. It's an area that I'm particularly passionate about and interested in, and it's an area that's really got a lot of traction over the last couple of years in terms of its popularity and uptake across the industry, and also in promoting it in people's gardens around the country as well. What is biodiversity, Michael?
Well, that is a good question, and I think I suppose people have different views and different opinions on it, but I suppose to put an exact term, it refers to the variety of life on Earth at all its different levels and ecosystems that it encompasses, and all the cultural processes that sustain life. And I suppose people may have been hearing more and more about it recently.
So when you talk about it's becoming more mainstream media recently, it's no small part down to the work being done by the National Biodiversity Data Centre and a few of their kind of initiatives, in particular the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, which has been rolled out right across the country, has been hugely positive and successful in terms of promoting pollinators. But as it is focused on pollinators are a key species in the greater ecosystem. And when you get the wildflower meadows right, and you get your pollinators in, it brings in the birds, it brings in the mammals. So it does create a bit of a balance. So these actions that have been brought in by the National Biodiversity Data Centre have really taken hold in the country and really gave a lot of positive change to our parks and green spaces around the country. It's fair to be said.
Yeah, you see, that's the thing about biodiversity. It touches into so many areas. It's because, as I said at the beginning, it's part of all our ecosystems. You know, it's encompasses every ecological or cultural process. So from agriculture, you know, across to our urban living, as we're talking about horticulture. And that's going across and going forward through the next couple of podcasts that we'll be doing. Biodiversity is going to come into them all.
Yeah, that's true. That biodiversity is prevalent in every aspect of the horticulture industry. That there's no job that you can do that doesn't have affects biodiversity on some shape or form. And that's one aspect of how the All Ireland Pollinator Plan has been educating people, park superintendents, gardeners, businesses, schools, teachers, that sometimes you just need to change your practices slightly to still get the work done, but also to be protecting the species that are in that area where you're doing said work is very important. And that's something that hasn't been done for many years. One of my favorite sayings is, just because it's been done for the last 50 years doesn't mean it's the right way of doing things. So we need to kind of look at how we're doing stuff and improve on that, and look about changing. And I think this is what the All Ireland Pollinator Plan has done.
Yeah, it is. It's obviously it's hugely important, and it's especially the point is being driven home for our pollinator, for the old humble bee. And it is, without the bee, of course, you know, nothing is going to pollinate. You know, we need the bee to survive. But I think it's been bounced around a little more than it should be, and we're probably not. We're making headlines of all the things we're doing, but I personally feel that if we were to break down what we're actually doing, is very, very little.
Yeah, I'd agree with you to a certain extent that we're only as good as what our neighbour's doing, and what the lad down the road is doing, and what your man out the west of Ireland is doing. That when we only come together in large numbers and figure out that these practices are the right way of going forward to protect biodiversity, that's when we're going to be doing enough. I think there's a lot of great work being done. I think there's a lot more work to do, but we're on a bit of a journey here. There's still a lot of people that needs convincing and to change their mindset on how they manage and maintain the green spaces around the country, and even how people maintain their own gardens. I think it's very important that we educate those people to maybe slightly change their practices going forward.
I suppose if we could say to people now, we could give them what would be your tips for they're going to I have a garden at home here now and I want to enhance it. What are you going to tell me to do now to spruce up my garden for Biodiversity Week?
Yeah, I get asked this quite a lot about what can I do in my garden for promoting biodiversity, or what action can I take. And what I say to people is start small. Like, don't go hell for leather and change everything. Like, start off small with maybe cutting your grass as you normally do, and just leave a small section in the middle of your grass out the back and allow that to grow throughout the summer. Allow the wildflowers to come up, allow the bees and the birds and everything to come in and feed on it and to enjoy that space over the summer. And then that's what you're going to do in year one. Have a size maybe about 1 meter squared in the middle of the garden. And then in year two you said, gee, that's a really nice spot. I'm going to make that 2 meters squared. And then year three you're looking at making it 5 meters squared, because you're learning how to appreciate it and the value of it that it's adding to your garden, and the benefit that it has to the biodiversity out in the back garden. And it's not just for animals, it's the plant species, it's the grasses, it's the flowers. Like, all this is benefiting from you just allowing your grass to grow a little bit. But like, by no means, when we're saying about promoting biodiversity, we don't want you to step out your back door and you're coming into the Amazon jungle. Like, you need to maintain your garden for you as well. You're very much a part of the biodiversity as well. Like, you need to be able to go out there, kick a ball about, have a barbecue, enjoy the space. So it's trying to find that happy balance of, this is what I'm doing for biodiversity, but it's also my space as well. So that's something that I would always bear in mind, is just don't go too big too quickly. Start off small and take it from there. I'd also look at just, it doesn't have to cost you so much money. It's just to look at what you're doing in terms of your management practices. If you can reduce your mowing practices, instead of mowing the grass once a week, why don't you just raise the mower height up and cut every 3 to 4 weeks? Or instead of using weed killer on a large scale, maybe just reduce it. I'm not saying to stop using it, just reduce what you're doing, and by year on year you'll start improving in this.
Yeah, and it's going back to that old chestnut of Roundup and weed killer, and I've been ridiculed for it many times for my, I wouldn't say love, but I use Roundup, I use weed killer on my driveway, I use it around the edge of my garden, I do. But if you saw my driveway, I'd have no choice, because my driveway is made of gravel, and how else do you keep the weeds out of gravel? You can't. So I think that when it comes down to the likes of chemicals, by all means, I think we should be cutting back out in farms and that sort of a situation. But we have to figure out how what are we going to substitute for these products? How are we going to stop the weeds coming up in my driveway without me putting down a bit of Roundup? And like, I've cut back a huge amount of Roundup, where I used to burn off loads of stuff in the garden to save on strimming. I don't do that anymore, and I now have a huge area at the bottom of the garden which I've left to grow wild myself. So, you know, it's about balancing it, isn't it?
Yeah, balance is a big part of it. I think it's very important that we find that happy medium in our current situation, where we can currently still use these chemicals and there's no banning them, etc., etc. But I'm not pro weed killer for any stretch of the imagination. But like I'm realistic that in saying that there's no alternative there. There's no financial alternative there. I would love to be able to say that I get on an extra 20 guys during the summertime and go strimming and pulling weeds by hand, but it's just not possible. So like, it's in the current climate, unless we're going to invest heavily in the horticultural industry and get more people in to manage our parks and green spaces, a chemical is the only option for some jobs, not all jobs, some jobs that just can't be done by hand or just by lack of manpower, I suppose. I feel with chemicals, the big issue with chemicals in this country is not the chemical itself, but it's the person applying the chemical. And we've an awful issue in this country with, sure, look, we'll put a little bit extra in the knapsack and it's going to work twice as good, a little bit for luck. And that misuse of chemicals that happen right across the country is causing absolute untold damage. It's really, really, really bad. But if you're using it in a sympathetic fashion, you're doing it at early morning, that you're not going to be affecting the pollinators, that you're reducing it and you're only using it in a very controlled manner, there's not as big a problem as what you would kind of be led to think in the current kind of climate. So yeah, I would say misuse is a massive area that I would say is a problem.
Well, what I am is pro reduction on it. I think we need to be just cut back, and look at all the areas that you have in a garden or in a park and say to yourself, can I not spray these? Is there a need for me to spray this? Can I do something else with this area and reduce the amount of spraying I'm doing? And I think that's where we should be at right now. I think in the future we probably will be able to phase all of this out. It's like diesel and petrol machinery. We are at a point with that where we're phasing it out. So I think the same with chemicals. A point will come where there will be a very effective way of phasing that out.
So bearing that in mind of like the challenges that you face, not only in your back garden and on a personal level when you're maintaining your own garden, these challenges exist in our parks and green spaces right around the country as well. And these challenges of where we once had an arsenal of chemicals that you could spray the moss in the grass, you could be killing weeds left, right and centre, you could be killing leather jackets in your golf greens. A lot of these things are coming off the market in vast numbers, and it's causing an awful lot of people to stand back and think about, well, how are we going to manage this? And a lot of parks and green spaces around the country are now taking these approaches of going zero chemicals, completely organic, not using any pesticides at all. A lot of them are taking on board the Don't Mow, Let It Grow campaign, and like it's really given a different view of our parks than what it was 10-20 years ago. They're really going through kind of a rebirth or a rebrand, for the better, I would think. But sometimes there's a bit of a friction between the people managing the park and the park users and how they interpret the park. And sometimes people feel that, oh, you're taking away my football pitch to grow a wildflower meadow. And then some people are like, well, why do you have a football pitch and don't have a wildflower meadow? It's swings and roundabouts. And like we've mentioned a few times before, it's finding that kind of harmonious middle ground that you're kind of keeping everybody happy, all park users, all the biodiversity in the park, and trying to improve on that. But like, parks are coming into a hard time in terms of getting that message across.
Yeah, so when people go into the parks, they shouldn't think to themselves, God, this park has gone really out of hand. It used to be so well kept, and now it's gone so downhill. It's they should probably dig a bit deeper into that, and you might find that the people who are managing the park are involved in the Don't Mow or Let It Grow campaign, and so that it might open their eyes up a little bit more to what's actually happening, I think. So it's growing legs. It's definitely growing legs around a lot more in the past year or 2 years at least, I think.
So just to put into context what the Don't Mow, Let It Grow kind of ethos is that a lot of the parks and green spaces around the country are bringing in, is the allowing a lot of their large tracts of grasslands to grow throughout the summer and allow the flowers that are in the seed base to come and flower and then come in at the end of the summer, and to cut it once a year and either gather it and compost it or bale it for fodder for animals. So it's a very, very beneficial management process, in the fact that not only are you promoting biodiversity by growing these meadows, that you're saving money, that you're not running machineries on it every day. You're creating food for animals, for cattle at the end of the summer. So like, you're winning on 3 accounts. So you're not spending as much money, you're creating habitat and providing food for biodiversity, you're feeding animals, and also when you're not running your machinery, you're not causing as many emissions, you're benefiting with less noise pollution, less air pollution. So like, these wildflower meadows, they're a bit of an old technology, but they're really kind of have a wider scope of benefit that transfers into a lot of areas that we'll be talking over different topics in the podcast over the next couple of weeks, like climate change, etc., etc. So like, these meadows can save you money in the long run. Like, it makes so much sense to Don't Mow, Let It Grow.
And I think they do need a little bit of management. I think, they do need a stripe put around the outside of them, and maybe 1 or 2 down the middle, to allow people maybe to walk down through them, to allow litter picking to take place, and so that the paths in the parks aren't getting totally overgrown. And that we're not just, we have to remember that they are urban parks. It's not somewhere out in the wilderness, and so urban parks come with urban problems, and so we are there to manage them, but we could manage them in a sustainable way.
And is there, like, we've talked about reduction of chemicals, we've talked about the Don't Mow, Let It Grow, is there any other aspects of the park management that you've seen in the last while that you would say is doing good things for biodiversity, or something that we could improve on?
Yeah, like, starting off there with initiatives that were brought in, I came across, it was actually working in Dublin, was a guy with a machine for planting bulbs. I thought that was excellent, and they planted up a lot of roundabouts and grass verges and stuff like that with areas like that with bulbs. And I thought that was a brilliant idea, and a great way of doing it. Very efficient. You could fly along there with the machine, and also then as the bulbs came on, we had a range of bulbs coming up over a space of time, which were great colour, and interest in areas which were nothing before that. As regards the natives, yeah, that's even down to wildflower seeds. People were getting packs of seeds and planting them, but I do believe that there is an issue then with invasive non-native wildflowers, which are good for the pollinator but not good for our native. If you take bluebells, you might have a non-native bluebell being more invasive than our own native bluebells. So that's it's the same with trees, though, isn't it? Really, it can plant a tree, and it can be a problem for our own native trees. But then going forward, we have to look at pests and diseases in trees, and that's probably a whole other area to get into for another day. You know, natives against non-natives, and trying to deal with pests and diseases that are going to come in, and what we're going to need to fight them off.
Yeah, the native v non-native has been particularly um, headline sort of news, I suppose, over the last while, and certainly in the horticulture industry, about a lot of seed coming in from different countries, and not using Irish seed. I know where I work, it's particular. I had to learn the hard way. One of the first planted meadows that I did, I bought in seed, thought it was a great lad, and ended up being French seed. So we had to tear it all up and put Irish seed in the next year. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of cheaper alternatives out there getting it in to plant. And is it the right thing to do? No. Should you pay a bit more to get the Irish or English seed? Yeah, absolutely. But something strange has happened in the kind of biodiversity being developed into this buzzword, in terms of it's suddenly become this marketable thing that nearly every supermarket has a wildflower seed mix, or every supermarket is selling a bird box, or a bug hotel, or something that you could put in your garden to promote biodiversity. So all of a sudden, this is a really hot topic that everybody wants to get in on, and a lot of the big supermarkets and shops, they're looking at it first and foremost of, we can make some money out of this, and then secondary, it might be good for biodiversity. But is the action of getting someone to put something in outweighed by not putting the right box in or the right seed in? This is the catch-22. Like, arguably, any action that benefits biodiversity should be merited, but at the same token, we need to be protecting our native flora and fauna with these, like you said, you mentioned the bluebell coming in. Having said that, what other issues do you think we're going to face as we move forward over the next 5-10 years in terms of biodiversity developing or contracting in our cities and across the country?
I do think that the only problem going forward will be urbanisation. And urbanisation is expanding at such a rapid rate that our little urban pocket parks are going to take a huge hit, and our wildlife and all of that is going to take a huge hit in the cities, as it's getting squeezed tighter and tighter and tighter in there. And we expect, well, we don't, but those who are designing it expect the wildlife to live in these little minute spaces that they specifically design for them, not how it's naturally meant to be designed. I think that's going to be an issue going forward anyway. You see, I noticed, and I visited a few new housing estates recently doing some tree surveying, and noticed that many of the new housing estates now don't really have a front garden anymore, and a very small back garden, if even. And like the idea years ago was where a housing estate would have a road, a grass verge where there would be a street tree, a footpath, your front garden, and then your house. That's all gone now because they want to maximize the size of the space. And so it leaves people now with very little areas for planting and no street trees.
The value of street trees in like an urban area, dense urban area like new housing estates or in the city centre is massive. Like, not only are they nice to look at and they do promote biodiversity, as you have habitat for birds to nest, insects to come in, and you have all the kind of benefits of them being green corridors, etc., etc. But if these trees aren't going in, forget about the biodiversity aspect of it. Trees produce oxygen that we need to breathe. Trees clean the air. they reduce noise pollution, they reduce air pollution. So by not having this green infrastructure put in from day one and just trying to get the maximum number of houses per square hectare, we're just going to lose out on, we're killing biodiversity, but we're also creating this sterile environment that we're going to be living in, a concrete jungle, so to speak, that the amount of research that's going in that is showing the value added aspect of trees outside your house, that it puts you in a good mood. Being connected with nature, it is a much more valuable asset to have outside your house than just an extra parking space. So this is going to be a massive problem going forward, and like, the problem's only going to get worse before it gets better. So that kind of covers a lot of the issues that we can see going forward with biodiversity, and how the industry needs to adapt to kind of suit the changes in management, how it's the changes in climate, the changes in products coming off the shelves, and like, I feel like we gave a fairly balanced argument about the real side of how we're managing things for biodiversity. We didn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah, I think so, because you have to be honest. There's no point in saying that we're going cold turkey on everything, and I'm outside with a kettle of hot water trying to scald the weeds. Like, I'm not. I am, but I'm balancing it out. Like, I'm doing both things, and I think that's what's important. I'm looking at this on my personal case. I'm cutting back on the amount of chemical I'm using way back. I'm adding to the biodiversity sections of my garden now, and I'm going to keep adding to it by say, even in my planting on my window boxes where I was using bedding plants, I'm not anymore. And they're all the little changes that we can all make over time. I think that's as you said, that's our honest opinion on it.
Yeah, like, that's well said, Michael. Just doing your little bit. That is the main thing that I hope somebody gets out of this podcast, is that you're only as good as the lad standing beside you, or the lad down the road, or the lad down the end of the country, and that we all need to come together, and all these little actions, the little square meter of unmown grass, the bit of rewilded area at the back of Michael's garden, the meadows around all the parks in the country, when all these come together and start to add up into big troughs of area, that's when we're going to see real change and real development of biodiversity. Like we said earlier on, that there's a lot of work done, but we've still a long way to go. And I feel that we're on the kind of cusp of the parks being transformed around the country. And I think the next kind of step is for anybody who has their own garden to get out and do a bit, transform a bit for Biodiversity Week. Look about putting a strip of don't mow, let it grow in your garden, and see how it goes. And I think if there's anything you can take away from this podcast, it's just do your little bit, and all those little bits will add up in the end.
Yeah, I think that's and I think that's a good bombshell to end on. I think that's a good note to wind this podcast up on. So I hope that we've touched on things for everybody, and we'd love to hear a bit more from you. Love to hear your feedback. So get in touch with us on our social media pages, by all means do, and hopefully it'll generate a bit of discussion going between everybody. And we hope you enjoyed our last podcast as well, and look forward to the rest of them that we have to come as well. So keep an eye out and keep sharing all our pages as well. It's most important to us.
So that wraps it up. Thanks a million for listening, everybody. We'll be back next week with another podcast. We'll be chatting about arboriculture and trees. So until then, thanks a million, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye bye.